sustainability. So this is our usual class time, but we have, a special event today. We have a special guest lecture by Dr. David Wright. David is a good friend of mine from Western Sydney University in Australia, where I am also an adjunct fellow at the School of Education. David is very much involved in social ecology. So I thought, who best, right, to call? And obviously, David came to mind. Yeah. So as you know, for this week, we are working on social ecology, and Dr. David will take us through Social Ecology 101. Yeah. So what are the basics of social ecology? I've shared with him, your backgrounds and everything. So he's aware that you are undergraduate students. He's also aware you're coming from different engineering, science, technology, and business programs. Yeah. So I'm not going to take much more time. But I'm going to, hand the session over to David. I'm going to start sharing screen, and I hope, all of you who are on the call here, I know there are some friends also. I see staff colleagues on this call as well. So welcome so much, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. Yeah. So this session will be for about an hour, including Q&A. To all students on this call, please remember you have an assignment to complete, which is a reflection of David's session today, which you need to submit via ULearn. Yeah. And at the end of the special lecture, we go back to our normal lecture. So I will meet you in the other room after this session. Yeah. Class is not over after this special lecture. Okay, so David, maybe you want to introduce yourself a little before I bring on the screen for you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name's David Wright. I work at the University of Western Sydney, or Western Sydney University. I've been there for quite a while, and I've worked in the social ecology program for most of my time there, also in the performing arts area too. And the social ecology program is now situated within the School of Education. In Australia at the moment, it's sort of conventional for people to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. So it's a really interesting development that's happened in Australia recently, where people acknowledge the Aboriginal owners of the land. We're in Aboriginal land, and we acknowledge their leaders and their elders, past, present, and future. And we're in the land of the tribe of the Darug people and the Gundungurra people. So I think that's an important thing. I think it's also really interesting in relation to our theme, or your subject area, of holistic perspectives. And holistic perspectives is a way of looking at the complexity of the whole, what is comprised within the whole, and the perspectives upon the whole, the ways in which you look at it, the ways in which you understand it. And necessarily the way in which you understand it has something to do with the way in which you approach it, or who you are, or who I am. So necessarily I am approaching the whole, my experience, the world as such, from the perspective of a sort of, middle-aged Western or Australian man of European heritage sitting in Australia. And that influences how I see things. And it's been really interesting talking to Subhana about who you are. You're coming from engineering backgrounds and science backgrounds. And it's really interesting that you're doing a subject around holistic perspectives. I was preparing a class for my Australian students yesterday, and I looked at a video by one of the people who informs my practice here, and is actually on the list of references that I'll provide you. And he says that there's a major shift in thinking that's happened in the world in recent times. And it's a shift from an underlying perspective of the world as a mechanical operation to the world as a system. So moving from mechanical understanding to systemic perspectives upon experience. And he argues that this is actually quite a radical and revolutionary way of understanding ourselves, understanding the world we're part of. And I think that's especially interesting in talking to people. A large number of you are engineers, and engineering is built around mechanical interrelationships. So we need to sort of understand how forces meet and combine and combat each other. In understanding those sorts of processes, it's important to understand that these occur also in a more complex world of experience, and that even those sort of mechanical forces need to be considered in relation to the larger systems that contain those forces. So if we can start the slideshow, Sabana, we can get things going. All right, so what I'm talking about with social ecology, as it says there, a way of framing experience and creating knowledge. And I'm interpreting social ecology in a very broad sense. I'm talking about it as a way of knowing. And I'm not going to talk about social ecology as a specific thing. So what is anthropology? What is sociology? We've got key texts in them. We've got key ways of understanding them. But they actually go beyond that. They are a way of understanding things. And social ecology is of that kind. And I'll talk about social ecology in various places and its use in various ways as a tool as well as a way of knowing. So social ecology is of its time. So if we can move on, please, Sabana. This is a fellow called Lester Brown. He's an American environmentalist, a very influential person in this field. And he says we're in a race between tipping points in nature and our social systems. Now that quote goes back to 2008. If we've been in a tipping point since 2008, there must be something becoming more extreme about that tipping point. You'll notice he also uses that keyword systems, our social systems, meaning also our nature systems, our systems of nature. A tipping point between the way those systems arise and interact with us. Our social systems are not just our systems of society and the ever-growing urban areas that we inhabit and different ways of regarding agriculture and food systems and water systems and climate, things of that kind. They're also to do with the ways in which our society thinks. Because the way our society thinks has as much to do with our relationship to that which is not social as what our society does. So we'll be talking about ways of thinking. And I'll be asking you at different times to think about your ways of thinking. How do you understand yourself in the world? How do you understand yourself as a dynamic system of engagement? What is the means whereby you affect the environment you are part of? And that is your social environment, your physical environment, your emotional environment, your legal environment. These different sorts of environments are easily accessed through a systemic analysis. And the interrelationship between systems is central to our conversation in social ecology. Can we go down? Now, this is a quote from a lovely writer called Andreas Weber. It's a German writer. He says, "We do not experience the world primarily with our minds, but with our senses and with our bodies. And the consequence of this connection in the flesh is that we perceive the world not as a causal chain reaction, but as a vast field of meaning." And here we have a very simple observation. The assumption is that we are an intelligent species, and we use our intelligence to make sense of the world and to arrive at decisions. But before our intelligence interacts with anything, we have an emotional response, we have a sensual response, we have a feeling response. Our feeling response to the weather, to the world outside, our feeling response to, the various beings that inhabit the world. So today, it's a colder day today than it was yesterday where I am. And I took the dog out for a walk, and it was a shorter walk because it was colder. I came back in and I looked at the sort of news feed that I look at every so often, and there was an article about dogs and how dogs affect our emotional relationship, and how connection with animals actually has a sort of a deep sense of expanding our sense of happiness and our sense of contentment through our capacity to sort of exist just sort of with a dog snuggling, sleeping on your lap. And of course, ironically, this happens the day after our cat had to be euthanized because the cat was very sick. And the dog has woken up without the cat, which is a lot easier for the dog because he sort of likes to bark at the cat. But this world of senses, this world that our bodies encounter, this world of experience enables us to then make sense. And we make sense in language. Language comes after feeling. Language is something on top of this, that we've actually sort of a system of signs that we've agreed upon in order to actually communicate with each other beyond grunts. And the level our sophistication leads to a greater sophistication of language. And it's really interesting to me that we're conducting this conversation in English, which I imagine is a second language for many of you, or most of you. And of course, I can't speak your first language. So my language opportunities are limited by my lack of communication skills in languages other than my own. I'm also aware that English as a great sort of Western colonizing force is a powerful international language. And in many countries, it's seen as important to understand English as a way of communicating with the larger world, which makes the English-speaking world very arrogant. They assume they only have to know one language, whereas in fact, people who know many languages hold the benefits of those many languages. Okay, on the next slide, there's a quote from another key informant of my own research, who are two Chilean biologists called Maturana and Varela, and I'll talk more about them later, perhaps. And they say, anything that is said by an observer. So we've talked about our experience, and we've talked about our language, the meaning that we make. Well, that language arises because I touch, I smell, I taste, I hear, I see, and I say something. I'm an observer of that experience. I'm commenting upon it after the event, or sort of deeply entrenched within the event. I'm responding to it. My capacity to analyze depends upon who I am, what I've done, what I've seen before, what I've tasted before, what I hear and what I see. I cannot, a lot of Chinese students, when they come to Australia to study, arrive with very highly developed intellectual skills, but very limited English and very limited understanding of academic English. The assumption on many people's part is that these people are not intelligent because they lack the capacity to speak the same language. That's because that observer lacks the capacity to actually appreciate the intelligence those students bring, because their background is limited. Their background is of a particular kind. Your background determines how you see the world in so many ways, how you observe, understand, and articulate. Your gender, your history. I don't know about Malaysia, but in Australia, most people doing engineering courses are male. They also have a reputation as being sort of beer drinkers and a bit aggressive. I doubt that's the same in Malaysia. But certainly the characteristic of construction and organisation has been traditionally a male domain. Does that contribute to the way things are said and talked about in that particular environment? Does that create, is there a sort of a social ecology of engineering that we can observe that looks to particular characteristics that are shared by people in that space and their relationships to the world they inhabit, based on their experience and their ongoing and the lives they are cast in by their employment? Is there something around that that constructs relationships that create environments that are seen as very influential in our society and beyond our society, in our sort of social relationships that determine the structure and organisation of our region, of our ecosystem, of our city, our villages, our country. So this analysis of an understanding that comes from somewhere is something that we apply to the term social ecology. So if we can move on, please. So we talk about social ecology as something, as a story that's told about relationships. And that story reflects the social ecology of its telling. So, for example, the social ecology school that I learnt and taught in is located in a suburb called Richmond, and this very northwestern suburbs, outskirts of Sydney. This is a region that's alongside a major river. It used to be an agricultural college, and social ecology grew out of that agricultural college. So its influences lie not in a cultural theory, not in cultural studies or humanities, but in the sciences of agriculture. And there's what's called an apocryphal tale about a course that they ran in the old agriculture school called agricultural extension. And agricultural extension meant that people would be sent out, experts would be sent out to various regions to look at those regions, to study them and draw conclusions about them, and look at what was influencing the particular agricultural dynamics of that region. So they would go to an area and they say, well, this is a rice farming area, or this is a wheat and sheep area, and this is a forested area, and this is a sort of a plain area. And they would look at it and they would sort of look at the sort of agricultural output and how much is grown and how much is harvested and this sort of thing. They'd look at the social relation. They would talk to people. And they would talk to people. And as the questions got a bit deeper, they would ask questions about what's it like living here? What makes people happy? What are the problems? And the expectation, the problems would be that the price of wheat is not high enough, or we need to earn more money for our crop, or the price of water is too high. But what they discovered is the things are, well, there are problems that we have in our societies because from the age of 12 to the age of 18, all the children go away because they go to boarding school, and there are only teenagers left in the town. Or the wives, when times are tough, all the women have to go and find jobs in the town, and they leave the men alone on their farms. And there's a big problem in rural areas when times are difficult on male suicide. And male suicide might have nothing to do with the price of wheat and the price of sheep, but it might have a lot to do with loneliness, isolation, the lack of children, the lack of society, the preponderance of alcohol, and things of this kind. So the social ecology of that environment is more complex than would be initially thought by people prioritising economic issues. So if we go on, please, Savannah. So when we're looking at the story of social ecology, of a social ecology, and why I say, what is your social ecology? Where is the story told? How is the story told? Who is doing this telling? Whose story is it? Where does the story come from? Key characters, places, communities, values, and attitudes reflected in the story. So, for example, in the the story of a region in Australia, many of those stories include stories of untold stories. And these can often be stories of massacres of Aboriginal people. So there's a recent news piece about a very famous person, and it's just suddenly been revealed that he was part of a massacre of Aboriginal people where a lot of settlers moved in and they basically shot and killed a lot of Aboriginal people. And the story of their triumph and of their use of the land and the money they've made from agriculture is the story that's usually told. What story is not told is the story of the Aboriginal people who remained intimidated and cowed and crushed by this sort of experience. So who's doing the telling? How is the story told? Whose perspectives are we seeing it through? Whose history is being valued through this sort of encounter? So when we're looking at a holistic perspective, we're taking as many of these sorts of considerations into consideration as we can. And that's the difference between a holistic perspective and a mechanical perspective of how things occur. Because the mechanical perspective does not take into account many of the impacts that are felt that are not easily acknowledged. So if we could go down to the next one. So the story is, how do we experience a social ecology? How do you see a social ecology in action? How do you work with it? So the social ecology of the region where I live, which is the Blue Mountains area, which is to the west of Sydney, is a very interesting area because it's a mountain range that was much higher, has been weathered and weathered and weathered and weathered over millions of years. It's an ancient land. It's an ancient landscape. If I want to dig in the ground and plant a tree, I go down about this far and I hit rocks. I hit clay. Well, not so much clay as sandstone. And then actually planting things and growing things is very difficult. But this is also a national park. So this is thousands upon thousands of acres of uninhabited land up around here. We just live along a road that goes through it. The uninhabited land is wild and people get lost here regularly. Bushfires run through here regularly. There's in fact an ancient tree that was discovered that no one had even known existed, that no one had known about since sort of prehistoric times. They found Aboriginal artwork in this area that no one had known about, that's sort of 30,000 years old. So how do I experience the social ecology of my particular region when I'm trying to grow things, when I'm trying to interact with people, when I'm trying to understand my society? Because a big part of my society is fire, or the threat of fire. So there's big community groups that organise around firefighting. How does our society survive the possible threat of fire? Because there was a fire to 2019, big fires all up and down the coast of, all up and down the eastern part of Australia. Fires that would probably cover half the landmass of Malaysia, or the mainland of Malaysia. Huge fires that were on the fringe of my area. That influences my social ecology. Over many, many years, the trees that grow in this area have grown in a way that means they can manage fire. After the fire goes through, they come back very quickly. Lots of trees don't. Lots of European trees burn to the ground. These trees don't burn to the ground. So how do we understand ourselves in this environment? How do we understand ourselves limited by the fertility of the soil, entranced by the beauty of it, scared by the danger of it, attracted to the proximity to the city, and also its distance from the city, which is very attractive, but also the community of people that inhabit it, the people that we like who are here. So these things are really important. So in discussing social relationships, conventionally people have looked at what they call the triple bottom line, which is in the next slide. The triple bottom line means that when you look at something, you look at its economic effect, its environmental effect, and its social effect. When we started talking about social ecology in the school that I've been working at, we actually changed this model. And you see in the next slide that we have incorporated the economic within the social. This economic is a social phenomena. It can't be separated from them. So if you look at the social and the environmental issues, and then we acknowledge the personal as part of this experience, but we are not simply part of this sort of social phenomenon that we are submitted to. We've actually got personal experience that we hold and value that may actually alienate us from other phenomena, but also enables us to make choices. And if that personal phenomena is taken into consideration, a whole range of new questions are asked. The questions that are asked by the previous model are, how much is it going to cost to do this? The questions that are asked by this model is, what does it feel like? What are the values that arise as a consequence of this understanding? How do we see ourselves in this perspective? How do we actually incorporate a conversation that's extended and deep and enriching, that takes the consideration and the experience of as many people as possible into this conversation? And Australia, which is now an incredibly complex environment, a multicultural country with people from many, many different nations, an immigrant culture built upon Aboriginal basis, is a country that requires those voices to be heard. There is not simply a dominant sort of controlling voice that is the only one that deserves to be heard or should be heard. There are many more voices that deserve to be heard. And the personal experience of being allowed to be heard or not being heard is a very, very important part of such an environment. And the world of nature exists in the same way. How is the world of nature understood, known, and heard? Okay, if we can move on. So these are two books that we've done. Subhana has got a chapter in the Green Book, Social Ecology and Education. This one was in 2011, and these are collections of essays by people who have been closely involved in our work, either as staff members or as students or as sort of people whose work has interested us. And the references are in the next slide. Yeah. So there are many different sorts of things within those chapters, within the sections of those books. I could run through them and tell you more about them, but it's probably haven't got time to do it. But if we move on, so this idea of a social ecology enables us to understand many phenomena. So we talk about bushfires. And, you know, the issue of bushfires is very pertinent because when I talked about those 2019 fires, I had a house my family had a house down on the south coast, down about 4 hours drive south of here, that was burnt down. So we lost our house, or our holiday home. It was demolished. And now we have to think about, if climate change and things of this kind are going to happen increasingly into the future, what do we do? Do we rebuild the house when a fire is going to come through again? Or if we're going to rebuild it, how do we rebuild it so that it lives with the fire? Because there's a person that I worked with once who, she was actually taken by a crocodile and she survived. But she said, I was in the crocodile's territory. Now, was my house in the bushfire's territory? instead of assuming that all crocodiles need to be killed because they took a human, or all bushfires need to be stopped, we need to spend enormous resources stopping bushfires because it is the bushfires that are the danger. It's our relationship to the crocodile, our relationship to the bushfires, that's the crucial thing. So how am I going to survive in this area, given that it's the potential of the bushfires happening again and burning our place down again? How do I proceed into the future, building the relationships and the networks that are part of it? Well, we've sort of thought about this a lot and taken various plans, and it's been a very interesting process. But the next slide down is the same sort of thing. How do we talk about this as a social ecological phenomena? Because this is very much an experience of our bodies, and it exposes very clearly the interrelationships that comprise society. You know, whilst I'm talking to you in Malaysia, if I go down, walk 10 minutes away from me down to the main street of my suburb, I have to wear a mask. I can't stand too close to people. I have to sign in to go into a shop. All these relationships have been changed by this phenomena, by this illness. And the nature of this illness means we change our understanding of who we are and how we're able to participate with each other in this sort of environment. And it's very pleasing to me that I'm able to live in a beautiful, calm area with lots of forest around. And I can go for a walk. I can walk sort of 10 minutes down the track, and then I can go into a gully, which is overgrown with trees and things. And it seems like no one's been there for 200, 1,000 years. It's just a beautiful sort of gully with a creek running through, and there's bushes. You know, it's like humans haven't been there. And that's just 10 minutes away. For 10 minutes, I come out of there and everyone's got to wear a mask. So the social ecological understanding of COVID-19 is really interesting conversation, really interesting point of analysis. How do we fit within it? And the next slide down is sort of slightly light-hearted sort of thing, but the same sort of thing. We can look at Donald Trump in social ecological terms, where he comes from, what his relationships are, how his relationships have got particular dynamics, how his ways of thinking have led to particular dynamics in American society. And we can extend that to looking at sort of relationships to oil and China and Europe and Middle East, and also the various sort of landscapes that the United States comprises. So anything, we can look at anything in social ecological terms. We can look at anything in that way, for its interrelationships, for the networks that comprise it, for its the dynamic that evolves from it. And as we look at it, our learning enhances, which is why I've always been quite happy for social ecology to be placed within a school of education, because it's all about learning. It's all about the experience that we inhabit, how we see it, and how it reveals ourselves to ourselves and ourselves to others, and enables us to participate more in a more informed way. Because we understand the basis of our experience, we understand our interaction, and we can interact with more responsibility, more spontaneity, more courage, and be part of something larger than ourselves. So if we go down to the next slide, we know that living systems are things that we're part of, but they're also things, ways of knowing. So society is a way of knowing. We know through our society. And I expect in ways, there are ways in which your culture and your communities know in ways that are different to ways I and my communities and my culture know. We know in relation to the environments that we are part of, because those environments are also systems of cognition. They feed back information and create further existence, further life, because of their dynamics. So the dynamics of the Blue Mountains in west of Sydney are very different to the dynamics of Ipoh. Many, many years ago, I went to Malaysia and I went to the Cameron Highlands, sort of a jungle sort of area. And I went to Malacca and saw the Portuguese heritage. And I went to Penang and saw the English heritage. And the ways of knowing that are generated by these experiences are very powerful. We know ourselves in relation to them. We know ourselves as part of them. And if we go down to the next slide or two, we can see that, this is a system of knowledge. This generates life. And its capacity to generate life, well, us humans come along and we paddle in the water and we, look at the trees and we try and draw theories about what this is all about. We come to conclusions from the point of botany and, water management or engineering. We might decide we want to put, the Petronas towers here. And we're going to sort of build something dynamic. We're going to put a dam in here so we can actually farm this land. We look at the systems and the relationships that comprise this place because it is its own form of knowledge. And if we're going to get involved in it, our knowledge needs to interrelate with the knowledge that comprises this environment. Same as the next slide. This was my young son just did a school project on hyenas. So we've been talking about hyenas quite a lot. Well, here is a culture, a community, a system of knowledge. And as you know, so much of the world of nature has been destroyed by humans over the past sort of, particularly last 500 years and increasing over the last sort of 100 years. The capacity of nature to survive is a remarkable thing. So the next slide is an interesting thing. I was again preparing a class for a group of students, and I came across a series of photographs done by a Japanese photographer who wanted to show people immersed in nature. So this is one of those pictures of someone immersed in nature, or sort of living out of nature. It's it's obviously a sort of a staged photograph, but there's a story behind it. There's a purpose to it, and that sort of story looks at the social and the ecological. What this intelligence this person brings to it, interrelated with the intelligence that the world of nature comprises. So if we see in the next slide, this is I think this is Mexico City. And it's an urban environment where there's a few trees around, but largely the world of nature has been supplanted by humanity. We've actually constructed something that is denying the forces of nature, that's overwhelming them. It means we've flattened the land, we've put the cars in there, and we've done all sorts of things. Of course, we'd like to make it beautiful and decorate it. But as we see from the next slide after this, the forces of nature can't be denied. Because this is actually one of the main streets of Sydney. And this is the time of the COVID vaccine crisis, pandemic. There's no one in the streets. This would be usually a very, very busy street. There'd be cars, there'd be trams, there'd be thousands of people, but now there's no one. Forces of nature, dictated by the pandemic, and organised by society because people have agreed not to come into the city or decided not to come into the city, has created something different dynamic. So the social ecological experience of pandemic has created this. Things will change, I expect, different ways in different times, but how will they change into the future? What will the future look like as a consequence of this sort of experience? Because we have learnt through this encounter about potentials and possibilities and ways of living that will change, and we will change. And the motto of this that we bring into it, that we say to all of our students, is in the next slide, where we say, We are it and it is us. We are that which is out there, and it is a consequence of us. We're in the middle of it all the time. We talk about our study as the perspective of the participant. We are inseparable from the dynamics that we are immersed in. We make observations upon them, but we are inseparable from it. And we're always judging from the position of being in the midst of it. This is why I have great uncertainty around the notion of objectivity, because we are always in the middle of the experience we're observing or we're objectifying. Objectivity is a tool we can use, but at the same time, we cannot detach ourselves completely from that which we're looking at. The very fact of looking at it creates an impact. And all anthropologists have sort of said that. So if we go on to the next slide, this is a little bit about what we have done in our course. The Social Ecology course grew out of the Agricultural College, out of agricultural extension, talked about participatory action research, used systems theory, and most particularly self-organising systems. So a forest is a self-organising system. It creates its own, maintains its own life. My body is a self-organising system. Society is a self-organising system. We work with the perspective of the participant in that process, and we value this thing called ecological understanding. So if we go down to the next one. And the aim of the course we do is not so much to explain what something is, so what social ecology or social ecology is, but to challenge our students to think in a social ecological way and to experience the impact of that way of thinking on your participation in the relationships through which you know yourself and the world around you. So to understand yourself amidst this process, amidst this challenge. And of course, the most immediate thing in this is in relation to climate. And, you know, in my country, we have a very, a government that is very much influenced by the fossil fuel industry and is very slow to act in this area. And the impact this is going to have on our culture and our community, because Australia is a very fragile ecosystem, limited water, huge amounts of desert, a lot of dry land. The ways in which this country could be seriously affected by climate change are vast. We could actually see the inland, the desert growing increasingly and spreading, and cities having to be reduced in size. A lot of the people living on the coast having to move inland a little bit because of rising waters and changing weather. So we are in the midst of this, not just of climate change, but of so much else as well. There's so much going on that we're trying to make sense of and communicate to and be part of. You know, each of our families can be thought of in this way. The social ecological systems that we contribute to. We can understand ourselves in relationship to them. So we're sort of running through this. We're getting towards, maybe if I talk for a couple more minutes, won't be able to cover everything that I've sort of prepared, but I think giving you a good introduction to what we're doing. So if we go down to the next slide, please, Subhana. This is the sort of areas that the staff I worked with came from community development, worked in sustainability, ecofeminism, creative practice, eco-psychology, reflective practice, sense of place, chaos and complexity, Jungian archetypal theory, Buddhism, talked about soul, talked about heart politics. So when I started working there's a group of about 14, 15 staff who came from these sorts of backgrounds. And we came together around this perspective of social ecology to address the key issues that are on the next page. So these issues of knowing through relationship, seeing oneself amidst and a consequence of relationship, change and looking at change in terms of relationship, understanding relationships based on a systemic worldview, understanding different sorts of systems, looking at self within systems, understanding the interaction between biology and epistemology or an ontology, understanding ourselves as being or becoming, constantly becoming, and understanding the storied base of knowledge and culture. So there's so much here that we could sort of expand upon. Maybe next time, Sabana, we can have 13 weeks together, but who knows? But the next, I'll just yes, go just through a couple more slides. In the chapter that I've got in the book, the green book that I showed you earlier, my chapter is about teaching social ecology. And I talk about how I teach the subject social ecology. And it's important that I use it as a way for students to understand themselves and their own experience. I can't teach you yourself and your own experience, but I can set up ways to help you to understand and think about yourself and your own experience. So I say, in our version of social ecology, we argue that the circumstance of any offering of any program in social ecology are interwoven to its content and its process. Okay, I've already said that. The purpose of this is threefold. As well as localizing the discourse, this approach depicts social ecology as a way of understanding unfolding relationships in a changing world based on local experience, rather than a static body of knowledge determined through a global discourse. It invites students' active engagement in that which is taught. So they're in the middle of it. They're actually influencing it by their studying it and contributing to it and conversing about it. It invites students' engagement in the assumptions of social ecology, its conceptualization, its influences, its processes, and its validity. Additionally, it is a means of enrolling students in the delineation of their experience, of the experience they have entered into. It aids recognition that it is their social ecology and that their participation contributes to its formation and the means whereby it is understood, represented, communicated, and enacted. So the way I understood my social ecology when I was, 11 years old is different to the way I understand it now. The way our society understood this when I was 11 years old, or in the 1970s or the 1980s or the 1990s, is different to the way it understands it now. Things have changed. There's been a lot of change that has deepened in investment and understand in the complexities of these systems. And we continue to deepen our insight into them as we develop, as we become more extensive and more insightful, I guess. And this has taken, if we go down to the next one, this has taken action in various places. So you'll notice that social ecology is talked about in a number of, or taught in many places in the world. In Vermont, in the USA, there's a place called the Institute of Social Ecology that has a whole history that's got a lot to do with the geography and the traditions of thinking that have come out of Vermont in the United States. In Los Angeles, there's a form of social ecology that's built around urban society and urban ecology, understanding of the relationships in a vast urban area. In Turkey and Greece, there's an understanding of social ecology that's very connected to the Vermont, the American Institute of Social Ecology version, but it's in a complex political environment that is of a different kind. There's the Western Sydney version focuses more on process than on politics. Several of the American versions are focused very much on community-engaged politics. How does our local community generate political action that will determine its future? It sees society as a collection of communities that interact in order to create effect. You know, state governments and national governments are abstracted and distant and far away, but communities have power and communities have capacity to actually register their own influences and their own interests. And these have something to do with the social ecology of that environment. There's a lot more to be said about this, but I think it's probably time for me to stop talking. And if there are any questions, we can start with this last quote. The embodied education philosophers suggest that understanding reality comes not from detachment and exercise of power, but from participation and empathic communication. The more deeply we empathise with each other and our fellow creatures, the more intensive and extensive is our level of participation, and the richer and more universal are the realms of reality in which we dwell. It goes on to the next page. Our level of intimate participation defines our level of understanding of reality. Our experience becomes increasingly more global and universal in character. We become fully cosmopolitan and immersed in the affairs of the world. This is the beginning of biosphere consciousness. So, starting from the local, our capacity to deepen our insight into our own experience and its integrity flowers us into a world of overlapping systems that we can observe for our own world, from our own environment. We are part of that larger system because we're part of our system. It means that our consciousness is determined locally, but the depth of insight that's comprised, that consciousness comprised, enables it to communicate beyond that local environment and to have relevance and effect within other environments. That requires those other environments to be open to that conversation and open to that consciousness, but it's a very, very important part of this sort of endeavour. This is why the notion of a holistic perspective is as much a question as it is a statement. How do we encounter and understand and contribute to or see ourselves within or fashion, understand this notion of a whole? When we have been trained by so many aspects of our experience to detach the world and see it as comprising many, many, many parts. We can be part, but we can also understand our part within the whole. And we can understand ourselves as part of this ecological consciousness and ourselves as contributing to its unfolding day by day by day as a consequence of our action and our thinking. So that's a good place for me to stop. Yeah, lots more of these quotes. Maybe I can you can make this slideshow available to the students, because there's a lot of there's some references at the end too.
Yes. Okay, this is the end of it. So I'll stop sharing then, probably. David, let me just exit. Okay. All right, everyone. Okay. Thank you so much, David. It was very, very thought-provoking. We actually had quite an intense session last week ourselves, and today we go into another such session. Can't thank you enough for spending your time with us. I know I said 1 hour, but I just lost track of time listening to you. And all those important things you mentioned to us, and I believe our students today are so grateful and so lucky to have had this opportunity to interact with you. So I'm not going to waste much time, but I'm now going to give an opportunity for students on this call here and even colleagues on the call here. If you have any questions you would like to ask David, you want clarifications on, some of the concepts he mentioned, this is your opportunity, because I don't think we're going to get David again anytime soon this semester. So anybody who wants to, ask questions, please, just feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Hello, Dr. David. May I ask two questions, if you may? Like, in your opinion, how wide the aspects that cover the social ecology? How wide does social ecology cover the aspects of it? And also, other than the forces of nature, like, is there any other way that can challenge or change social ecology as a whole? That's my two questions.
Well, what I think is social ecology is a tool. It's a way of thinking, and it's a people have approached what we're talking about from different perspectives, using different names at different times. We've just used the term social ecology to understand this broad, immersive appreciation of our relationships in a complex world. People have used different sorts of terms to describe this and talk about it, but the key thing that comes to it is thinking about the patterns. There's a wonderful quote from Gregory Bateson who talks about the patterns that connect. So what pattern connects the amoeba to the the elephant? What pattern connects me in the Blue Mountains to you in Ipoh? The patterns of consciousness and communication enable us to sort of see ourselves in relationship. And that capacity to see ourselves in relationship means that we don't necessarily make assumptions that are invalid. We bring into consideration the consciousness that each person brings to this conversation. So your experience, your background, and your insight is something that I need to actually encounter in order for us to communicate effectively. And those are sort of basic human principles. But when you apply those to, the world of animals or the world of nature, it adds dimensions to it. How do we understand the world of nature in a way that we can actually engage constructively with it and not deplete it and destroy it and lead to devastation of our climate? How do we engage with an understanding of, for example, water or fire or heat or cold, such that we can actually live with it rather than combat it? These are all really big questions. And they're questions that are worth asking in so many ways. I mean, I asked the question, how do I sort of inhabit this environment with my children when we're experiencing lockdown and the children are all in the house and they want to watch television or the iPad, when we want them to get outside and exercise and use their bodies and feel? All these complexities, they exist on different scales, but they're all present. The same conflict and question are present in all of these sort of dilemmas. Social ecology is a tool for thinking about depths of participation in a whole vast range of experience. That's the way I see it. I hope that's helped with your question.
Thank you, David. Okay, I think we have time for maybe just one more question.
Hello, can you
Yes,
hear me?
yes, Izuddin, go ahead.
All right. Good morning for Madam and Dr. David. So I have a question on my perspective. Since we are in the course of holistic perspective on sustainability, and you are in the course of teaching the social ecology. So I want to ask your opinion on the on today's climate change situation. What do you think the level of the effort on combating the climate change itself? Do you think the government and the NGOs and stuff are doing a great job, or it can be better? If it can be a better way, what do you suggest? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I have to rely on a lot of information put out by scientists who are working with skills and tools and knowledge that I don't have. But from what I gather, I think we're acting too slowly. I think in our country in particular, our government has been very slow to act, and it's dominated by people who are connected to the coal industry. And I think there are other countries that are acting much more effectively than Australia is. And I'm not sure about the politics of Malaysia, but I think that this is something that is very, very important, that governments act collectively. You know, the government's been able to act collectively around the COVID crisis, and the climate change crisis is of a magnitude much greater than the COVID crisis. And it will have an effect for thousands of years, or hundreds, perhaps, thousands of years to come. And it has an effect upon the potential for us to continue to inhabit, vast parts of this planet. So I think that it's the responsibility of everyone, whether they're government or NGOs or corporations or whatever, to actually be seriously involved in this. And I think that the political moves are all a little bit late, but we just got to support them as they go forward and encourage them to take serious action.
Thank you, David. That was a very difficult question to answer, but you did it. All right. Thank you so much, David. And so thank you so much again, everyone, for being on this call, both students, colleagues, and all. David, a special, big, huge thanks to you for being with us today. And if I may ask, everyone on this call, if you can turn on your cameras, we can do a quick photo, and then I can then share this with David as well. So while everybody is getting their cameras on, this is just a quick announcement. I hope all students on this call, you have benefited from this session. I know that. So just a reminder, class is not over. We will move back to our platform, the usual lecture platform, shortly once I end this call. And please also don't forget to put in your reflections for the lesson today. Yeah. Okay, can everyone turn on your cameras, please? Because I only see David and myself with our cameras on. Yes, Izuddin. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly take a snap. Mufaro, if you can help me as well. Thank you. All right, ready everyone? 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we can turn off our cameras now to conserve internet. So David, thank you so much. I'll write to you again later today to let you know how it went. And looking forward to having you next semester as well, David.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you so much. You take care.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Guys, I'll see you in our class, yeah? See you then.